Well, good evening, FBN. So good to be with you in this setting for our midweek Bible study in Proverbs. This evening, we're going to do something a little uncharacteristic. We're going to make our way through an entire chapter of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 7, this evening. And so, if you have a copy of the scriptures, would you open up to Proverbs chapter 7 as we make our way through the whole chapter? And I'm excited about this evening. It's not going to be so much new information. We've been looking in this area of seduction and in adultery and all of these just kind of big topics, that the author gets into here in Proverbs. We're going to continue that, but it does take a different approach, and so we're going to follow that. And he writes as though he's watching a scenario play out in front of him. You'll kind of see that, and I think through this story that he tells, we can obviously there's a lot to learn for us, but also I think what he presents to us is some ways that we can spot seduction, right? Which is the idea of wisdom, that we'd be wise enough to see dangerous, harmful things around us, have a sensitivity to it, so that we can be aware enough to avoid it and not to find ourselves in the middle of it and then suffering regret as a result. That's the spirit of wisdom. There's a provisional spirit to it. That's just, it wants to provide for us and to spare us of potential danger and harm that can come whenever we don't have our eyes and our hearts tied to God's wisdom. Okay, and so that's the idea with Proverbs chapter 7. There's a story that I always think about when I think about just this sensitivity that we desire to have in the wisdom of God. I remember a story of a young woman who was she was actually an abortionist doctor. She performed abortions, and through a roundabout way, the Lord just kind of saved her life, and her marriage and all that kind of stuff. And it had nothing to do with the abortion, her abortion work at the time. It was really all related to her marriage and all that kind of stuff. But the Lord grabbed a hold of her heart. She went to work the next day, and the very next day she said she walked into the clinic, and everything was just heightened. The smell, the light, everything. It just made her feel just gross inside, right? She had this new sensitivity to the evil that was around her that she never knew was so evil. You know what I mean? And so the Lord gave her this heightened sensitivity to that sinfulness and that evil of that clinic and what they did and these operations that they would perform and the abortions that would happen there. And she didn't last long. I mean, I think she went for maybe like a day or two, and then she was just like, I can't do this anymore, because God had given her a heightened sensitivity to the dangerous and sinful nature of what was going on around her, right? And that's a really, really good thing. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around in a moment, but we want that heightened sensitivity, don't we? Especially in the realm of seduction, adultery, marriage, sex, all of that stuff, this crazy, big, chaotic world that's just getting more and more so. I pray that you want a heightened sensitivity inspired by the Lord's wisdom, so that you might be spared the chaos that comes from this, right? And so let's get into it. We're going to find 8 ways to spot seduction this evening through this chapter. We're going to move briskly through it. Why don't we have a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into it. Our God, thank you so much for this evening. Grateful for your word. We do pray that this evening you would give us a heightened sensitivity, that we would be able to spot just seductive tendencies in ourselves and in other people, and then appropriately bring these things before you and let you correct them in our lives, so that we might spare ourselves and that you might spare us of any extra shame and humility and regret. And at the same time, God, would you increase our sensitivity to what is good to you in these areas, and let us pursue those, not just to avoid what's bad, but to pursue actively what is good, all to the praise and glory of Jesus' name. Do this work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Proverbs chapter 7. Let's jump into verse 1. The author says, "My son, obey my words and treasure my commands. Keep my commands and live, and guard my instructions as you would the pupil of your eye. I like that note there. It's kind of a different phrasing. We haven't seen that yet. The pupil of your eye, if you're reading one of the older translations or more established translations, you might read the apple of your eye. And what it's referring to is the pupil. That little black dot that just controls how much light comes in and out of your eye so that you can see clearly. And it's something that we want to guard. In fact, if you damage your pupil, you're going to damage your eyesight pretty bad. And so guard God's instruction in your life like you would guard your own eyes, right? You wear protective eyeglasses. You wear glasses that help you see better and help, kind of manage some of that stuff. So guard it. Keep it near, and don't let it be compromised, with anything else. Okay, so this pupil of your eye, he says in verse 3, tie them to your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your relative. Again, if you have another translation, it might say kinsman there. It's a relative that you know well, right? It's a near relative. And she will keep you from a forbidden woman and a wayward woman with her flattering talk. Okay. Again, this is a father writing to his son. It's Solomon writing to his son or sons here. Or later in verse 24, he talks about sons. So I would guess that at some point in time there were multiple listeners to, what he had to say in the book of Proverbs. Certainly all of us as well as sons of God. You know what I mean? We can receive this, sons and daughters of God. But in this context, he's writing to his son, and so he's trying to spare his son. And so it's an adulterous woman or a wayward woman that's often the object of or the picture of seduction for the son. In the same way that if a mother was talking to her daughter, it might be a wayward guy who is the object of seduction that the mom uses to teach her daughter about what to avoid and that kind of stuff. And so we need to understand that even though that is the theme of this, that it works both ways. Everything that we're going to talk about tonight, these 8 ways of spotting seduction, it goes both ways. Okay. And so, even though I will speak as the scripture is speaking, I pray that no woman who might be tuning in thinks that I'm like misogynistic by any means, or just like every woman's wayward or something like that. You know what I mean? I'll try to keep that balance, because we all understand that men and women are prone to be seductive in their own ways. Okay. And so we'll try to keep that balance as we go through this. This is a very common introduction, very similar to the other introductions that he's had in previous chapters, where he just guard my instructions, obey my words, treasure my commands, tie them to your fingers, write them on your heart. We've looked at all of these and kind of these phrasings. And the point is this: just be very, very near to God's wisdom at all times. That's the point. Be reading it, let it soak into your heart, let it play out in the way you live. Just be close to wisdom at all times. Okay, that's the idea, because if we do, then it will keep us from these forbidden women or men, these wayward people that can so quickly get us off track. And usually it's through the method of sexuality that they can so easily get God's people off track. And so he goes on to tell this story. Okay, so in verse 6, he says, at the window of my house I looked through my lattice, and I saw among the inexperienced, I noticed among the youths, a young man lacking sense, right? If that doesn't sound like an old guy sitting on his front porch looking at all the youths in the day and just frowning and in being upset, at the way the world has gone and all that kind of stuff, it's definitely what it sounds like. But, he's saying that he noticed this. And, if he was the wisest man in the world, Solomon was, then he probably could see it. He had a heightened sensitivity. We all know that Solomon kind of fell apart, at the end of his life, and gave himself to the very things that he taught against. And yet he tells this story. I don't know if this is a literal thing that he actually saw, or if he's just using this as a strategy to teach his son. But the story goes, he peeks through his lattice and he sees an inexperienced young man who is lacking sense. Okay. I love that phrase, lacking sense, because that's exactly what we're talking about, is having a heightened sensitivity, not lacking sensitivity to what is good, what is right, what is morally and spiritually good to the Lord for us to do. Okay? And so he sees this young guy. It says in verse 8 that he crosses the street near her corner. He strolled down to the road to her house, and at twilight in the evening, in the dark of the night. Okay? So he sees this senseless man, right? Again, without wisdom, we have no godly sense. And so this man was probably not tied to God's wisdom, or else he wouldn't be strolling in the middle of the night. And the first kind of piece of spotting seduction is just looking at the secretive nature that it often occurs in. Okay, it's secretive. He goes to her house at night, at twilight, in the evening. Right? He knew where to go. By the way, he knew where to go. I mean, he knew what he was looking for. But he goes in the middle of the night. There's a secretive nature to it, and this is a problem, especially in our day and age. You don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to go to someone's house anymore, because you have cell phones, you have social media, you have video, based apps on your phone that are designed to take a little video and then to send it, and then it's erased forever. You know what I mean? So it's just untrackable. It is very easy to give way to secretive ways of connecting to people and looking for this kind of stuff. I mean, there are literally websites and apps designed to set up these exact experiences, right? And it's not good. It's very dangerous, and so it's something that we need to be spotting when it comes to just our own efforts to live in God's wisdom against seductive ways and seductive tendencies, is to avoid the secretive parts, right? So as a person, if you are struggling with this, you would probably say that the times that you most often compromise your own purity, whether that's pornography or actually hooking up with people or whatever the case is, that it's done in secret. Okay, so let's just take the base level, the pornography epidemic that most people, most young people have waged war with in some level. They've gotten caught in that somehow. Most times that stuff happens in secretive times. It happens at night. It happens in loneliness. It happens when nobody else is watching. And so one of the best ways really to avoid some of those seductive patterns and some of those things that compromise impurity is to just avoid the secrecy. Don't put yourself in lonely positions. Don't put yourself in places where you're going to be alone and you know that you'll have a tendency. Or if you do know that you're going to be alone, leave your phone in your car or something like that. You know what I mean? Just to have some of those guards up. There's a secrecy to, certainly in the case of adultery, but also in the case of just impurity altogether, that we've got to be inspired by God's wisdom. We've got to have our guards up about that stuff and make wise, practical decisions to avoid the secrecy, the secret nature of seduction. Okay, it goes on to say that in that dark of night, right? Verse 10, a woman came to meet him dressed like a prostitute, having a hidden agenda. Okay, so he doesn't really hide anything there. He says pretty clearly what she's dressed like. She's dressed like a prostitute, so very promiscuous, I'm guessing. Probably not wearing much. she comes and she basically she comes out to meet him. Okay, and I think this is one that we could talk forever on, but we're not going to talk forever on it. But it's another way to spot just kind of seductive tendencies, is just to look at modesty. I think it's a very underrated piece of wisdom that people often just don't give credence to. But modesty is what you wear has great impact, guys and girls alike. But I would say especially knowing that men are more visible, right? And women are probably just better to look at in general in anyways. You know what I mean? There's this world here where it is very easy for women to dress in a way that inclines a person's eye and heart to the way that they've dressed, and just by simply covering up a little more, by just having modesty as part of who you are and what you're about. I mean, that you have no idea the amount of angst that you are sparing men in your surrounding environment, or at least men who love the Lord and who are trying not, to give their thoughts and everything into that. I mean, it's a tough world to live in, I think, because standards of modesty have gotten so they've just been lessened. Like when I was in high school, leggings weren't even a thing. Right? And so you can go even further back, and there's a lot of these things that are just socially accepted now. And I'm not saying they're sinful or not, necessarily, but I'm just saying it's good to have an awareness of personal modesty, and to serve other people by helping them, like by being one less body for other people to get distracted by, and all confused in their faith by. Does that make sense? And the same goes for guys too. It's great to have big muscles. So love that. You know what I mean? Good for you. Glad you're being healthy. You can still wear an appropriate size T-shirt. You know what I mean? There's things that people can do on both sides to just help everybody not just be like, just not be so attached to just the physical appearance of each other, right? It's an important thing. Okay, and so mothers, fathers, be teaching your children just basic modesty of dress, and start that stuff early. Young people, college students, my heart goes out to you because you're on the college campuses, and there's like no standards. I understand that, and so be tied to wisdom, stay fast to that, and especially if you're trying to spot these seductive tendencies in the people that you might even want to date or be with. Listen, let this be one of those measures, right? I'm really interested in her. I'm really interested in him, but man, they just kind of have this immodesty issue. But they're so righteous and so holy and all that kind of stuff. Listen, don't underrate it. Take that stuff seriously, because what you are attracted to is also what everybody else in the world is attracted to. You know what I mean? And that stuff has to be guarded. Okay. So that was kind of a jumbled way of talking about modesty, but it needs to be something that is commonly addressed, especially parents to our kids. We've got to be training them in what it means to be a modest person, because it helps people who are serious about their faith, and it helps limit the distractions in the world that can so easily, distract them from their faith, from their pursuit of wisdom. So that's kind of in modesty. He goes on to say that she is loud. Verse 11, she is loud and defiant, and her feet do not stay home. Okay? Now in the street, now in the corners, now in the squares, she lurks at every corner. Okay, so she's kind of everywhere. She's at all places at all times. She's loud and she's defiant, right? And so that's another marker: loud and defiant. We'll just put them together. These are other markers of ways to spot seduction. Loud being kind of boisterous, high energy, loud, just noisy, always moving, always cheerful or rowdy or frisky or bouncy, whatever the word is that you want to use with that. It's just kind of this big personality that's can't seem to calm down, and at the same time, it's a defiance, or a stubbornness is probably a better word to use. A stubbornness, right? So big personality, loud, and you also can't influence them at all. They're very stubborn in the way that they conduct themselves, and they're everywhere. They're in the street, they're in the squares, they're all over. You know what I mean? And aside from that, she's dressed like a prostitute, as he says here. So you can kind of just mentally picture this person. Okay, they're everywhere. This is an encouraged way to be in our current social climate. But I want you to hear this. 1 Peter chapter 3. It's an anchor verse or set of verses that I appeal to a lot because I so value this, and I so value this in my own wife, and it's something that I even try to strive to be like, even though it's talking about wives, right? In 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says, "Wives, in the same way submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives." Okay? And so what he does right at the start is he talks about the behavior of the wives being more powerful than your words. Okay? So the focus is on behavior. And he says, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. So this behavior is of purity and reverence. And he goes on to say in verse 3, in 1 Peter chapter 3, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, right? Such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes, all of which, by the way, she was probably wearing, would possibly be part of a prostitute's look, right? And so there's different grades of all of this, but that's an extreme extent. But it's very, physical. It's external. It's all based on that, right? And there's different degrees, of course. It says that your beauty should not come from these things. If you rely on that stuff for people to see you as beautiful, then you're missing the point. He goes on to say, rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. Okay, so dressed like a prostitute, loud, boisterous, defiant, and stubborn, right? That's this personality. That's this person, this seductive person, versus 1 Peter chapter 3, the strong encouragement to let beauty be one of inner beauty, which is unfading, and it's gentle, and it's quiet in spirit, and it is of great worth in God's sight. Right? Now, I encourage men and women both to pursue this because I think it's worthy of that, right? To not think about your outward adornment as anything that, to get the attraction that you need to feel or whatever it is, to not depend on that, but to focus always on the inner self, the inner beauty that comes from a gentle and quiet spirit, right? This was not this woman. And if you're looking for love, chase 1 Peter chapter 3. Don't chase this. Okay? Don't chase this Proverbs 7 woman. Have a wise spotting of this, right? So that you can avoid, what comes after this, right? And so it continues. The story continues. She comes to him and she grabs him and kisses him, and she brazenly says to him, I've made fellowship offerings today. I've fulfilled my vows. Okay. So far we've talked about, how to spot seduction. We've looked at the secretive parts of it, the immodesty, the loud and defiance. I'm going to add religious to the list. Okay, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but it says that she comes up to him, she kisses him, and she says, I've made fellowship offerings today. I've fulfilled my vows, right? In Jewish culture, they would go make their fellowship offerings, but when they would do, there would be meat left over. And so they would take this meat left over from their sacrifices and they would eat it at their homes, right? And so she's gone to make her sacrifices. She's a religious person, right? And she actually uses her religion and her pursuit of God, or at least the picture of it, to draw this guy in even more. Now that's dangerous stuff, right? And she says, this is the meat that I have left over in my worship to God, right? And I want you to share it with me. And I hope you see how dangerous this is. But listen, this stuff happens all the time. I can't tell you how many times the church and religion and small groups and those kinds of things have actually been the very things that people use to set up seductive encounters. They use the pathways of worship and the pathways of religion and pursuit of Jesus to actually fall into sexual harm and promiscuity and all of that kind of stuff, right? If you notice, in regards to just spotting seduction, anybody who has a hint of spirituality but then still fails in all of these other areas of modesty and just this idea of they have no semblance of a gentle and quiet spirit at all. And further on, we're going to talk about some other things. I mean, if there's a disconnect to you, don't let just the religious piece trump all of the other ones, right? Well, she struggles in this and that and this and that and this and that, but she's kind of religious. You know what I mean? I can't tell you how many times we have these conversations with young people who are like, they have a new boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is, and it's like, okay, well, they probably struggle with all these things, but they go to church. That's the common one, right? Well, you got a new boyfriend, great. And, is he a believer? Does he love the Lord? And you're like, oh yeah, he goes to church. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really help me, right? Because even people like this can go to church. Like, everybody goes to church probably somehow, some kind. Like, how does that shift and shape the way that they live their whole lives? How does that affect their modesty? How does it affect their personality and their dependence upon the Lord to enrich them from the inside out instead of focusing on the exteriors? How does that work? You know what I mean? That's just it's not enough. A hint of religion, a hint of spirituality can be used as a means of deceiving people into seduction. All right, we have to have our guard up against that. It goes on to say, she says, verse 14, I've made my fellowship offerings today, and I fulfilled my vows, so I came out to meet you, to search for you, and I found you. Right? Even though he was the one that was seeking and desiring, right? The senseless guy on the corner just looking for something, right? Now, all of a sudden, he feels like he's the object of her desire. Okay, you see kind of the strategy there. She says, I've come out to meet you, to search for you, and I found you. I've spread coverings on my bed, richly colored linen from Egypt. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. Right? At once, he was this senseless man on the street corner looking for love in all of the wrong places, and now he is the object of this wonderful affection. He is the object of her desire, and so he feels accepted and he feels desired, right? Not only that, let's go ahead and read on verses 18 through 20. So she says, come, let's drink deeply of lovemaking until morning. Let's feast on each other's love. My husband isn't home. He went on a long journey, and he took a bag of silver with him and will come home at the time of the full moon. Okay. So he's a senseless man on the street corner looking for something. And now all of a sudden he is the object of desire. So it's a frequent thing that we hear of people who just they give themselves to bad relationships because they didn't feel desired elsewhere, right? One thing that I feel like is so important for us. We've been talking about tying ourselves to wisdom, but it's so important for us to understand that tying ourselves to wisdom doesn't just mean growing in head knowledge, but it means growing in a knowing and being known with the Lord your God, who loves you and cares for you and desires you above all. And so if you feel like you're lacking in the area of being desired, the Lord Jesus Christ is the very first person you need to run to with that desire. The desire to be desired. You've got to go to him, not to a person, especially not to a person who is not your husband or your wife. But even in that context, all right, I'm a husband. I've been a husband for 11 years, and I am not enough to satisfy my wife's deepest desires. I'm not. And we came to grips with this early on in our marriage. See, the Lord is the only one who can give her the desires of her heart fully, right? Now, he might use me here and there to accommodate that, but overall, he is the one and the only one who can speak to her heart and to meet her desires the most and the best. I just can't, right? And so this man, I can only guess, is out there looking. He's desiring something, but he's senseless. He doesn't know what he's doing, really. And then she comes and says, hey, you are the best person in the world, and as a result, I've laid out all of this stuff for you, and we're going to have a night of lovemaking because I desire you. right? Egyptian linen, right? All of this, all of the feelings of wealth and just goodness and all of this stuff. I want to just pour it out on you. I want to lavish you with my desire for you. We've got to find our fulfillment in this in the Lord Jesus Christ first and foremost, because anything else is less sufficient. And especially if it happens outside of the context of God's wisdom, it's going to wreck your soul. It will feel good for a moment, and then it's going to eat you alive. So if you are that place of wanting to feel desired, and so you give yourselves to bad relationships, you give yourselves to bad encounters, and you dress in a way that solicits, people's temporary desire for you and affection for you, and you post things on social media in order to get a rise out of people and to get that and to feel just some level of what it feels like to be desired by people, then you have a gaping hole in your life. Honestly, you have a gaping hole that you need to be filled by Jesus Christ first and foremost. I had a wonderful conversation with a young man the other day he was talking about, and it doesn't happen a lot for him, but he's new, he's back in college and all that kind of stuff, and he was just struggling with his heart to just be, he just felt lonely. I mean, he just felt lonely. And he said he got to what he would call probably a depressed state about it. He just felt so lonely. I guess people in his life and all that kind of stuff, but just, how life circumstances and all of these things can just build up in a moment and just get you in that place of just feeling alone. And he said he went back to his dorm and he just had this time with the Lord where he just prayed to the Lord, and the Lord affirmed his own love for him, for this kid. And he said it was so crazy because I was at such a low place, and like just in a moment, the Lord took me into this place. Like he started to tell me the story, not like, man, I've been depressed lately, but he told me the story as like a high point. It was a praise, right? Like I had this low, but then I had this time with the Lord, and the Lord just filled his heart. It just filled his heart. And if you genuinely seek the Lord in this, He will give you the desire, right? He will give you the desire of your heart, which is to be desired. He will fill that for you because He does certainly love you, and He wants you to know Him more and more, and to know His love more and more. Okay? And again, that's all part of fixing yourself to the wisdom of God, not just to grow in knowledge of Him and to have a heightened sensitivity, but also to grow in true intimacy and relationship with your Savior, with your Creator. Okay? That's going to spare your heart of a lot of futile attempts to have your innermost desires met by people, human people, who just can't do it. And they can pretend like they can offer that to you, and it's always going to end in the same place, which is pretty much death. And that's where he goes. Not only that, she says, right, that my husband isn't home. He went on a long journey. He took a bag of silver. There's another thing here in regards to just spotting seduction, right? This woman, sure, she seems to be kind of the object of evil here. But if she's married and she has a husband who just randomly leaves every once in a while with bags of money, maybe we can have some compassion for her too, understanding that her marriage is a wreck probably. Whether he's going on business or whether he's going to spend it on other prostitutes or, whatever it is, he's just like, he's gone, he's out, and he's got bags of money, so he's not coming back for a while. And so what is she left to do? And so that's one of the spottings of seduction, right? Not only this feeling of wanting to be desired and being desired, and not also the feeling of safety, right? My husband's not here. He's coming. He won't be back for a long time. You know what I mean? So there's this feeling of safety, but there's also this negligence on the spouse's part. Okay. And so, you're in the office place and there's a woman who confides in you, male. She confides in you about her marital issues, right? That's like red flag number one. Probably don't do that. Probably don't go there or refer her to a godly woman or something, or just keep it very basic and very general. So I just finished my master's in pastoral counseling, and it was like every single class I took, every single book I read, every single thing it talked about um, um, just affairs that would happen in the counseling session. And why? Well, it's because there's a guy, a counselor, who means well, but he finds himself in scenarios where he is spiritually tending to the hearts of really broken women and in their marriages. And so what happens is that they talk it through even in a safe context, but what happens is that woman ends up fixing her heart to this man who actually resembles the man she's always wanted. You know what I mean? This man who's offering spiritual support to her and encouragement to her. There's danger in that. You cannot go there. Right? She probably, maybe, according to Proverbs chapter 7, if her husband often does this, then this probably is part of the reason that she's doing what she's doing. Because she's also not being satisfied in her marriage, and so she is giving herself to other things, to other people, maybe in order to fill something in her own life that's lacking. Okay, so again, the point comes back to this. Let the Lord fill you most and first. Do not expect people to do what only God can do when it comes to satisfying your desires. And then notice here, verse 21, she seduces him with her persistent pleading. She lures with her flattering talk. He impulsively follows her to the slaughter, like an ox going to the slaughter, a deer bounding toward a trap until an arrow pierces its liver, like a bird darting into a snare. He doesn't know it will cost him his life. The last way to spot seduction is to see the persistence that it comes. Persistence. It keeps going, even at those places where you think like, this isn't good, I probably shouldn't do this, but then they heap it on even more. There's a persistent nature to it. I think honestly this is a lot of the reason why many people find themselves in these tough situations, where it's just becoming more and more common now, especially in after the Me Too movement and all of that kind of stuff, where there's just a blurred area now where nobody knows really what happened with anything. But I think persistence is one of the reasons that there's such an unclarity. Imagine a scenario where, things are escalating and people are, together and it's becoming more and more physical. And then at some point somebody says no, but with hesitation. And so through persistence, it ends up happening. Whatever happens ends up happening, and then everybody's just left confused afterwards because there was like some hesitation about it, but it also still happened because of persistence. And you know what I mean? That's like just the physical exchange there. The persistence just confuses things, right? And so if you have somebody in your life who's like persistently trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do, right? That's like a clear sign. Like if you're just in a dating relationship and somebody says, hey, we should go here. And you're like, nah, I probably shouldn't because I'm a believer and I don't really think that that's the right place for us to go. I want to keep our boundaries. And then the next day it's like, hey, we should go here. It's like, no, I mean, how many times are you going to give the explanation before you either just give in or get out, right? And that's the encouragement to get out of the situation. Don't give in to the persistence, because if you give in, again, it's like an ox going to the slaughter. Get out. Okay, get out. And that's the encouragement I want to leave with you all today. I know we're at about 40 minutes here. Let's read these last few verses, and I'll give you just 3 things to keep in mind. Now, sons, listen to me and pay attention to the words from my mouth. Don't let your heart turn aside to her ways. Don't stray onto her paths, for she has brought many down to death. Her victims are countless. Her house is the road to Sheol, which is death, descending to the chambers of death. Okay. So he ends with the encouragement, guys, don't give into this stuff. Women, don't give into this stuff. And so let me just give you 3 little pieces of encouragement as you think about all of it. The first is this: keep your heart fixed to wisdom. Keep your heart fixed to wisdom. And by wisdom, I mean keep your heart fixed to the Lord in the growing of wisdom and the satisfaction of having your desires met by your Lord, right? To grow in wisdom, but also to have your desires met by Him and Him first and alone. Okay? Let that be the first. If you are walking this daily, be in the Word daily. Surround yourself with godly people who are going to encourage you and lift you up and support you in this, and have this sensitivity to seductive patterns of people so that you don't get caught in the wake of other people's sinfulness, okay? That's the first thing, is to always have your sensitivity up by keeping your heart fastened to God's wisdom, and to keep your heart fastened to wisdom in the growing in wisdom, and in letting him satisfy to the desires of your heart. The second is to actively pray against temptation. Right? Just think of the Lord's prayer where Jesus teaches us to pray, and he says, God, deliver us from evil. Right? Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And it's actually something that we should be actively praying about. Not just, God, keep me holy, keep me pure, but like, deliver me from temptation, deliver me from evil, and lead me not in temptation. Like, there's so many scenarios that we find ourselves in that are tempting, but if we be praying always with this sensitivity, right? Who knows what God would spare us from, right? He might even like guard our eyes without us even knowing about it, and he'll help us be free of some of those things, those triggers that seem to get us back into this place of impurity, to be praying about it in that heightened sensitivity. All right. And then the third is this, right? We saw how this woman was kind of loud and boisterous and stubborn, right? And that was the wrong way to be stubborn, uninfluenceable, right? But I want to encourage you all to be stubborn in the right way, okay? And what I mean by that is be stubborn when it comes to truth, and be stubborn when it comes to holiness. And if you have anything in your life that persistently tries to compromise those things in your life, be stubborn to the point of breaking up. Be stubborn to the point of severing the relationship. Be stubborn to the point of getting out of that situation. Does that make sense? Be stubborn in the right way. It's a holy stubbornness that has zero tolerance for shifting and blurring the lines of what is appropriate and good to the Lord. When it comes to sexuality, when it comes to seduction, when it comes to all that stuff, right? Be stubborn enough to just not even go there, and to just be done with it, and to be fully satisfied in the Lord to do so. Okay. So that's a lot there. Listen, would always like to have conversations about this stuff, or if you're a woman struggling with some of these things, I'd like to refer to you to a godly woman who could be a good resource to you. We have so many people in our church who would love to have these conversations with people. I know there's a lot of pain tied with all this, and there's a lot of cultural confusion with all this as well. But listen, we must take this stuff seriously, and it all begins with fixing our hearts to the wisdom of God and letting him fill us from the innermost places. So be encouraged with that this evening. Thank you all for sitting through many of just my personal thoughts about a lot of this, but also I pray that the word was encouraging to you this evening as well. Love you all. We'll see you this weekend.